Later that evening, Pani Dombrovska managed to coax Tadzio and Magdalena into performing Chopin's Etude in E major for piano and violin for everyone before bedtime. When Professor Handelsman heard the announcement, he looked at Pani Dombrovska with wide eyes behind his spectacles. "I didn't know Chopin wrote an Etude for piano and violin," he admitted. Pani Dombrovska pursed her lips, making her sleek Greek nose look even more slender as she sheepishly stared at the parlor floor. "Actually, Professor, Tadzio has arranged a violin part for Chopin's piano Etude in E major so that his sister can play the melody with him on her violin. The two of them had hoped to perform this new arrangement in the Chopin Young People's Concert this coming fall. They've been working on the piece for the past 6 months." "Well, well," the professor said as he motioned with his hands to gather everyone into the parlor, encouraging them to take a seat around the piano. "Tadzio, my boy, I knew you had talent on the rifle range as well as archery and map skills, but I had no idea you also possessed such musical ability. By all means, we must have a command performance." Stefan pushed his way past Tadzio as he entered the parlor. "Right, he's just a regular Mr. Perfect," he mumbled under his breath as he flopped down on the dark green velvet sofa. The professor heard Stefan's remark. He sat down next to him in an upholstered winged Queen Anne chair and then leaned over to speak into his ear. "Not perfect, Pan Lutovsky. Skilled. You have skills as well. After all, you chose to leave with me in the morning. Tadzio chose to remain behind." As Tadzio's mother settled Henio on her lap, Josefina next to Andrei, Lucinia next to Krzysz, the portly professor placed his hands over his mustache, then made one more comment, addressing the group. "Did any of you know that, according to Chopin's biographer, Chopin once told his copyist that he believed he had never written a more beautiful melody than the one found in the E major Etude? On one occasion, when Chopin was listening to it, he lifted his arms like this, and then clasped his hands over his head." The professor imitated the gesture. "Then he exclaimed, 'O Poland, my fatherland!' As you all know, Chopin never returned to Poland after the cadets rebelled against the Russian Tsar in 1830, and how he loved our Poland. You can hear his longing for his homeland in every strain of the E major Etude. He wrote it 2 years after he left Poland. What a fitting melody for this evening." Tadzio had never heard that story. As the professor dropped his hands into his lap, Tadzio thought he could see the professor's eyes glistening. With everyone now settled in the parlor, silence permeated the room. Tadzio and Magdalena's eyes met. Magdalena's bow drawn across her strings, chin resting on her violin, waited for Tadzio's head to silently count the beat. Then the magic began. Magdalena's lilting melody and Tadzio's pulsing 2/4 rhythm worked to transform the room into a unity of emotion for the fatherland of Poland, for the yearning of freedom, of love, of family, of home, of everything good in life. And for that one brief moment, it helped to push back the painful knowledge that inky mists of darkness, even at this moment, crept across the forest floor, seeking to snatch it all away. Even Stefan seemed grateful for the short concert. The 3 youngest children fell asleep before Tadzio and Magdalena even reached the song's climax. Tadzio noticed that Lech never took his eyes off Magdalena or her violin bow once she and Tadzio began to play. "That was amazing," Lech gushed when Magdalena lifted her bow from the strings after the final note had faded. Tadzio noticed that she blushed slightly. "Thank you," she managed to say, as she placed her Roth violin in its coffin-shaped case. Lek placed his hand on hers as she fastened the latch. "I've never heard anything so beautiful," he almost whispered. Professor Handelsman coughed slightly. "Andre, Lek, and Stefan, set your alarms for 5:30 a.m., he announced. "We head out right after breakfast tomorrow." Magdalena gave Lek a puzzled look. Lek stared back at her with a pained expression in her eyes. He looked like he wanted to say more, but Tadzio noticed out of the corner of his eye that the professor flashed Lek a stern look. Tadzio wanted to ask the professor where they were going, but realized that since he, Magdalena, and Kshish had all chosen not to go with them, he had no right to ask. Angry at the Germans, himself, his father, and everyone else in general, he kissed his mother on the cheek and shuffled off to bed. When Kshish had arrived 10 minutes later, he pretended he was already asleep. The next day, he discovered that Professor Handelsman, Andre, and Lek and Stefan had already left by the time that he and Kshish arrived at the kitchen table for breakfast. When he asked his mother if she knew where Professor Handelsman had gone, she simply told him, "Off to do important scouting work, I suppose, but I appreciate you staying here to help me with the children, Tadzio. I know you'd probably much rather be off with them." Tadzio wasn't so sure he'd rather be off with the scouts. He could only imagine what kind of danger they might encounter. The next several weeks brought thunder showers, cabin fever, and endless games of hide-and-seek entertaining the younger children. In the early afternoon on September 23rd, everyone gathered around the parlor radio to hear Władysław Spielsman's live Chopin concert from Warsaw. "See, things are not so bad at home," Magdalena tried to sound cheerful. In the background, however, Tadzio could hear bombs exploding close to the broadcasting center.